Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Mohon maaf, tadi mungkin sudah keburu dimulai. Selamat datang di acara seminar kita di Binus University International School. Saya akan mengucapkan terima kasih atas kesempatan dari Binus University International School pada Bapak Wince, Direktur Student and Operation Binus University. Kemudian pada ICP, Ikatan Sarjana Ilmu Informasi dan Perpustakaan, Mas Farli Elmeri. Kemudian juga kepada Embassy of the United States of America, Bapak Jetaro Lonbo. Hari ini kita akan mengikuti seminar dari Bapak Stephen Rainer. Sebelumnya kita akan isi dengan sambutan-sambutan. Yang pertama dari Bapak Wince, Direktur Students and Operation Binus University. Pada Bapak Wince, kami persilakan.
Mr. Stephen, thank you very much, and it's very nice to have everyone here. It's fine. It's nice to see your spirit, your excitement to be here. Okay, just a bit. We just want to welcome everyone here. It's nice to have you in our university. Actually, Binus is one of we are a private university. We can claim ourselves as the best in Indonesia, and we create this Binus International special for. I mean, we have our regular one, but we create also a small for our best students to be here for our international program. And we like to welcome everyone to be here and enjoy this event and this situation. A very good topic. I read your resume and they know it to talk to us. Thank you very much for your time and willingness to be in our campus, and also from British Council, from the U.S. Embassy also. Thank you very much for your time, and for PCT also. I think that's it. Everyone enjoy the event. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih Pak Wince. Tanpa berpanjang-panjang lagi, kita bisa langsung masuk ke acara. Saya panggilkan moderator untuk membawakan acara, langsung masuk ke diskusi tentang the fake news dilemma.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Pak Rainer. So it is supposed my turn to introduce yourself. So basically, as Mr. Stephen Rainer already introduced himself, he is both experienced as a lecturer and also journalist himself. He even started his journalism career as in Campus magazine back then. So previously he was in ABC, NBC, and also a producer for the famous 60 Minutes in CBS. I believe many of you watched the show. So today we are going to discuss about fake news, hoax news, such a hot issue in Indonesia, as I discussed earlier with Pak Rainer. When actually the phenomenon started in Indonesia. And I said, if we trace back, actually we may say that it started on 2014 during the presidential election. And then Mr. Rainer said, oh, it means you're ahead from United States. We just do it in the previous presidential election. So we win in this case, yeah? Unfortunately. But actually, the history of Fox News is way far even before those presidential elections, and it's getting worse and worse nowadays. If you see those campaign, black campaign, hoax, fake news everywhere, especially in social media. If previously we deal with the New Order or Suharto regime, when there was no freedom of expression, it's very difficult to write anything because the government will might ban your publication, or you yourself will be, as a journalist, will be sent to jail. And it's not just talk, yeah. It's actually some journalists went to jail because they published things that did not approved by the government, and some publication was banned because of those things. And after Reformation, 1998, we are happy that we no longer have we're not limited in freedom of expression, but maybe we have euphoria. We have so many freedom of expression, so as long as you have money, you can publish everything. You don't have any license to publish everything. Including, you can publish everything, including hoax or fake news. And it's getting worse because not only because the media literacy somehow is low in some area, especially in remote area, but also this phenomenon are actually used by those in politics. They use this fake news, they actually produce the fake news to reach their objective. What we have now is a tsunami of information. If previously we have to go underground to find deeper and background information, but now, because it's like a tsunami information, we have to select, filter. Information is everywhere. You do not have to go far to find information, but you have to have the ability to select it, not become a clicking monkey. Anyone familiar with the word clicking monkey? So you see the title and you just share it because you feel that you agree with that. It represents you agree with that. So you just share it without checking the credibility of the news. So today, please welcome Stephen Reiner to discuss more based on his work experience and also the current research in US especially regarding the fake news, and hopefully we can apply this in our attitude in using social media and media in general, so that we're not part of the clicking monkey. Monkey is cute, yeah, but when it comes to clicking monkey on the internet, it's dangerous. Yeah? Okay, please welcome.
Thank you. It is a dubious distinction to be ahead of the United States on the fake news front, but you have my congratulations. Just before I start, there was another point that you made, and it's something that I read. You know, the always fiercely debated about the utopian possibilities of the internet and also the dystopian possibilities of the internet. You know, those who think it's going to continue to usher in a world of greater personal freedom and greater democracy, or those people who think it may just do the opposite. And one of the things that the internet has done, of course, is, and you've heard the phrase, give voice to the voiceless, empower so many more people who once were not empowered. And that is quite true. But there is a flip side of that, because among those people who were voiceless and who have voices now, and among those people who were not empowered, who are empowered now, are of course crackpots and hate mongers and people who would disrupt the body politic. So it cuts both ways. It always cuts both ways. I have two presentations. I'm going to try to get through the first one rather quickly because I think the second one is a little meatier. Hopefully I can share some insights and experience and observations that are new to you or informative. My suspicion is that because Indonesia is a vital and robust democracy, and the world of the press is vital and robust, that there's a lot of this that is going to be quite familiar to you. But be that as it may. I call this the fake news dilemma because it is a dilemma for those of us who teach, for those of us who are citizens, and particularly for those of us who at least were or still are journalists. because the dilemma that the fake news phenomenon brings to journalists is really considerable. I want to start out in a little unconventional way by introducing a word that actually exists in the English language. I'm not quite sure what the translation would be. The word is retronym. It's not a noun, it's not an adjective, it's a retronym. And a retronym is a newly necessary alteration of an old noun. Once upon a time, the noun, name of something, was sufficient. And for instance, once upon a time, there was grass. There was a grass field. But then the invention of what I think initially in the United States it was called AstroTurf, because it was invented in Houston, Texas, with the Houston Astrodome. And of course, Houston is the headquarters of NASA and the home of the astronauts, which is why it was called AstroTurf. And now, of course, we have a retronym, artificial turf, and also we need to now categorize grass as real grass, as opposed to just simply grass. Conventional warfare. Once upon a time, warfare was warfare, but then the nuclear technology and nuclear weapons came, and now we differentiate kind of warfare. Analog clock. Clock was a clock until there were digital clocks. Now there's an analog clock and a digital clock. Manual transmission. Once upon a time, every car had that. It was just called the transmission. Now, of course, you differentiate it with a manual transition. And lastly, regular coffee. Coffee was coffee. Once there's decaf, you have to say, well, I'll have some regular coffee now. Okay? Anyone goes to a Starbucks, you know how many adjectives you can apply to coffee. Well, the latest retronym, of course, is fake news. News used to be news. Now it's fake news. And the corollary of fake news, the antithesis of fake news, which is really the retronym here, is fact-based journalism. Can you imagine? that now the noun journalism needs to have an adjective put in front of it to differentiate from misinformation. And in fact, some of you may know that in 2016, the Oxford English Dictionary named the word of the year as post-truth, a hyphenated word. We live in what is becoming called the post-truth era. There's a political satirist in the United States by the name of Stephen Colbert. Anyone ever hear of Stephen Colbert? He's very funny. Now he has his now he has his nighttime show, but he used to do a program where he got in a character every night and pretended to be a right-wing bloviator. And he came up with a fascinating concept which he called truthiness, which essentially was not falsehood, was not a lie, but it wasn't truth. It was somewhere in between. It was kind of like truth, but really wasn't. Well, now we not only live in a truthy era, we live in a post-truth era. Indeed, it is a fake news invasion. Now, I don't think a lot of people in the United States, certainly, because we tend to be very parochial in our view of the world, I don't think a lot of people in the United States know what you know very well, that fake news is a global phenomenon. I think the United States and citizens of the United States may hear about it perhaps as it applies to what Russia may be doing with the elections in Europe, with the elections in Germany, with the elections in France. Certainly, it's been a phenomenon in the United States. But as I've learned in preparation for this visit, you guys are ahead of us. And you are very, very familiar with the world of fake news because social media and information on social media is extremely widespread here in Indonesia. I put a Google alert in preparation for this visit and put in fake news Asia, fake news Europe, fake news Indonesia, fake news Thailand, where I'm going after I leave Indonesia in a couple of days. And every day it's populated by all sorts of stuff. Some of them just pick up on the word fake, but I'm aware that you've had your experiences with fake news and continue to have them and face the dangers of them. I ran a clip, which I'm going to go through rather quickly. I'm not even going to play it because I want to get to the more important stuff. But in researching where fake news is particularly impactful in China, does anybody know where evidently it's most prevalent in China? What area? It's not political, it's not economic. It has to do with food. China has had a lot of experience with food that's turned out to be tainted. It's food that's turned out to be dangerous. But there's an epidemic of fraudulent reports on the dangers of Chinese food for the Chinese mainland. And particularly when it comes to plastic seaweed. There have been some elements of seaweed, packaged seaweed, not being the real stuff, but being phony, being plastic. But evidently now, 20, 30, 40 different kinds of videos have reached millions of people in the People's Republic of China. And some of the biggest purveyors of seaweed in China are facing millions of dollars in loss because of fake seaweed videos frightening the population. There's lots of different kinds of fake news, and one of the differences between fake news today and fake news back in the old days when it was considered to be somewhat harmless and perhaps just somewhat salacious, but didn't carry with it the political dangers it has now, is that fake news has been monetized. There are people who make tremendous amounts of money learning how to troll, learning how to game the internet ecosystem. I don't know whether you're familiar with a lot of the journalism that's been done about one particular town in the country of Macedonia, which has something like 40 different purveyors of fake news that have learned how to make money, how to create clickbait, have learned that don't have any particular political agenda, don't have any intellectual agenda. It's really all about where are the most vulnerable areas that we can create fake stories that will go viral, that will get traction. Obviously, there are also political reasons. There are propagandistic reasons for the dissemination of fake news. And sometimes it is in the service of propaganda, sometimes it's in the service of political partisanship. But fake news, because of the extraordinary virality of the internet, because of the ability for information to spread at mind-bogglingly fast pace, information can spread and information can be powerful. One of the currencies of fake news is, of course, the contribution to a kind of conspiratorial thinking. We believe certain conspiracies about why things are the way they are. What's the real story behind this phenomenon? And as people, no matter what country, become a little bit more vulnerable, become a little bit more confused, find it more and more difficult to find simple answers, simple explanations for complicated subjects. They tend to turn more and more toward conspiracy stories to explain the world to them. It's a very human response to an ever more complicated world. And fake news and the purveying of fake news on the internet feeds into this. Now, why does fake news live? Why doesn't it die on the vine? Why isn't it simply rejected as silly or dangerous or obviously fake? What gives it its extraordinary ability to infect the internet, to infect the political discourse, to infect the social cohesion of societies in various countries? Well, number one is it appeals to the emotions. We know, the neuroscience tell us that, and we'll get to this a little bit later, we do not think first and feel later. We feel first and think later. Information that reaches our emotions is powerful information, much more likely to be retained and much more likely to be believable. Now, this can be used in a positive way, because when one wants to address an audience, when one wants to disseminate information, one wants to connect with an audience, one wants to have some empathy with an audience, one wants to relate to an audience. And frequently that is done through some sort of an emotional connection, to find a common ground between the speaker and an audience. What are the things we have in common before I start telling you some information, some facts that I want you to absorb? But on the other hand, any information that appeals to our emotions is we're much more likely to accept it. This is not an arbitrary claim. This is something that, although there are, of course, studies which are attempting to refute this, most neuroscientific evidence indicates that we feel first and think second. We also are subject to something called confirmation bias. We like information that confirms what we already think, that confirms what we already believe. We want to have our feelings confirmed. We will read an article, we will watch something on television, we will read a post, and we love to say, yep, that's right, let me pass this on. We tend to more and more, because of human nature, because of who we are, we tend to live more and more in what someone once called intellectually gated communities, sociologically gated communities, politically gated communities, where we find enough like-minded people who we want to be our neighbors, and we close the gates, and we find that we are perfectly happy just speaking to and hearing from the converted. There have even been studies that have been done that have put together groups of people who may, let's say a dozen people, who may have moderate views about a particular subject. And they all have kind of moderate views. They're all kind of open-minded, but they generally agree on a particular area. And you put them in a room and you say, why don't you people just sort of talk about it among yourselves? And time again, that same group will come out, and each of those people will be even more convinced, even more entrenched in their points of view, because they've been spending time with other like-minded people. Even people who are not so firm, whose feet were not set in concrete about this, will tend to, if there's enough confirmation bias, will feel more and more strongly about what they believe. I talked a little bit about bolstering conspiracy thinking. The more complicated the world gets, the more struggle people have, the more economic challenges and economic insecurity people have. Certainly the Western world is now experiencing this, and one can see it in the presidential election in the United States. One can see it in Great Britain's decision to exit the common market. One can see it now in the election in France, where Marie Le Pen is a viable candidate to become the president of France, who's, from a political point of view, that wouldn't even have gotten remotely close to that kind of opportunity maybe a scant 10 years ago. People tend to, when they become a bit unmoored from the familiar, and the United States, of course, is a case in point, where you have a tremendous divide between the working class and the elites, between black and between white. People tend to embrace conspiracy thinking. The internet tends to encourage conspiracy thinking. And of course, the internet itself, the digital ecosystem, the digital world itself, the world of hyperlinks and the world of RSS posts and the world of interlocking spheres of websites and hyperlinks, in and of itself can encourage and allow to grow kinds of ideas that can spread like wildfire. Frequently, what starts out as something outrageous, and we talked about this before, once upon a time, in the United States at least, and to some extent in Great Britain, this was fake news. This was hoax news. That child found in cave, somebody's ghost is running the mafia. Elvis, of course, is still alive. Elvis has been alive now. How many years has it been since Elvis is dead? A long time. This was kind of benign in a way. But, and even today, stories that are not necessarily this crazy, but stories that start out as satire, stories that start out as something provocative for the sake of being provocative. We have our first video coming up. Stories that are provocative for the sake of being provocative turn into something else. And here is a perfect example. It's come in the United States to have the terminology of Pizzagate. I don't know, many of you are not quite old enough or not that familiar with, of course, Watergate, but now anytime anything happens in the United States where it's somewhat of a scandal, we throw the word gate after it. So this was called Pizzagate because a story started running which you would think any rational person couldn't possibly believe, that the Democrats, and Hillary Clinton in particular, because of her association with her primary and closest aide, who happened to be married to a problematic character named Anthony Weiner, she was running a child sex ring out in the back of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. Now think about that for half a second. Completely outrageous, completely ridiculous, not rational, almost as crazy as, some two-headed Martian came down and decided that he or she was going to be president of the United States. But lo and behold, New York Police Department and FBI insiders threatened to expose Hillary's pedophile sex ring. Here's the aide, Huma Abedin. And one fellow from North Carolina believed it enough. Does anybody know what he did? I think this video will say it. Okay, so if you take the map, there you go.
About 3 o'clock this afternoon, an adult male, approximately in his late 20s, entered the Comet Pizza with an assault rifle.
Not quite sure where this music came from. Must have done something goofy. Okay. Well, some fellow decided to take matters into his own hands and got a couple of assault rifles and loaded in his car and drove up to North Carolina and was going to take care of these operators at the child sex ring all by himself. And of course, there was no child sex ring. And fortunately, he didn't hurt anybody and he was arrested. But it really became perhaps the most chilling cautionary tale of where fake news went during the American presidential election. One of the other major fake news stories in the United States during the election was that Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump, which I think was probably the most widely disseminated story. But what all the analysis has showed during the American election is that viral fake election news stories outperform real news on social media sites, for instance, Facebook. You can see that as the election got nearer, and I put the word celebrated in quotes, we just passed President Trump's 100th day in office, but we're still talking about the presidential election a lot in the United States. And as you can see, as the campaign developed, the engagements, the visits, the clicks, the passing on, the monkey clicking, if that's the term I'm now going to bring back, began to exceed mainstream news sharing on Facebook. By the time the election came, there was more than 1 million engagements for the top 20 election stories. trolling has become as American. I don't know what the corollary phrase is, whether other countries have phrases like as American as apple pie. That's a phrase. Is there such a phrase here? As Indonesian as ... Or as French as ... I don't think so. I think America probably has that more than anything else. We troll. The President of the United States trolls. We all troll. I don't troll. A lot of these, there is now, both in Indonesia and in Europe and certainly in the United States, almost an industry that has grown up trying to make some sense of this phenomenon. Why it's happening, how it's happening, whether it's going to continue getting better, whether it's going to get better, whether it's going to get worse. A number of very reputable institutions in the United States, research institutions, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, the Nieman Foundation, which is affiliated with Harvard University, the Pew Center for Public Research. There's three kind of quasi-journalistic think tanks and research centers who've done a lot of studying about this. The Pew Research Center, and Pew in the United States is really one of the sources for a lot of very, very credible, nonpartisan information. Spoke to 8,000 scholars, tech experts, and government leaders, and basically asked, what can we expect to happen in the immediate future, in the near future, about the quality of our public discourse? And sadly, the overwhelming majority of the answer was the quality of our public discourse will continue to deteriorate because of these phenomena that we've been talking about. We're in a state of a certain degree of bewilderment, a certain degree of panic. Certainly those of you who are, if any of you are student journalists or no journalism, knows that on the one hand, this can be the golden age of journalism, particularly it certainly is in Indonesia compared to your recent history. But in the United States, to some extent, because of the internet, because of the economic earthquake that has occurred with the dominance of the internet, the economic model for journalism in the United States and around the world has basically collapsed. It's no longer viable to be an advertising-based medium. The United States has lost 250,000 journalism jobs within the last 10 years. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of newspapers have closed. And most of the newspapers that have closed are not in Los Angeles or New York City or Washington, D.C. They're newspapers in the middle of the country. They're newspapers out of the big cities. They're local newspapers and regional newspapers and state newspapers. Newspapers that report on city council and state legislatures. And normally are the ones who report on local corruption. The ones that are closest to the readers, those newspapers have closed down. The state of journalism and the state of fake news was very, I think almost poignantly pointed out by a fellow by the name of Brian Stelter, who is now the CNN media correspondent. Used to write for the New York Times. This was recorded right around the Thanksgiving time, so there'll be some reference to Thanksgiving. But I thought this was a very sort of accurate depiction of the state of the journalist's mind in the United States right now.
We do have problems. I think everybody feels it right now. One of the problems is that fake news websites are so easy to set up and so profitable for the creators. Every time we click and share, they make more money, but we are worse off. So Facebook and Google are now trying to choke off the ads that show up on these sites, trying to make them less profitable. But that is a losing battle. These fake news sites are always going to exist. In fact, they're probably going to get better at blending in and looking real. The same goes for hyper-partisan blogs and Facebook pages that only tell people what they want to hear, that celebrate their side and demonize the other side. You know, on this program, we used to talk about red news, blue news, but we are now way beyond just red news and blue news. We are in an environment where some people are choosing to be colorblind. Media literacy is part of the solution here. As a society, we need to help each other distinguish between reliable and bogus stories. The more media literate you are, the less likely you'll be tricked by propaganda. And that's what it is, propaganda. Journalism is also a big part of the solution. As an industry, we have to redouble our efforts to restore our credibility. But to tell you the truth, these are not satisfying or complete answers to the problem. I don't have complete answers. I know a lot of us are going to be gathering around Thanksgiving tables in a few days, unable to see eye to eye about basic facts. In this age of information warfare, every person can just pull out their smartphone and pull up a story that tells them they are right, their loved one is wrong. So how does this end? With no one trusting anything? There's more fact-checking than ever, but fewer people trusting the facts. Are we moving more into an authoritarian media climate? More like Russia or China? I don't know. I feel so empty and frankly so pessimistic about this. But I know that people in power all around the world benefit from confusion. They benefit from this confusion. So we must be vigilant as journalists and as Facebook users and as family members of Thanksgiving. Refuse to be confused.
It was not going to be a lot of fun at Thanksgiving dinner. It's a pretty depressing thing. So journalism is trying to reinvent itself. And in journalism's attempt to reinvent itself, it is attempting in that reinvention to find some way to combat fake news. Because fake news eats away at, destroys the very underpinning of journalism. And that was a depiction of, who's that a depiction of? I found it on, I went to Google Images. What did I type in? Who? Who was that? Sisyphus. Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus, who was doomed to just push a rock uphill. It's sort of a metaphor for perhaps a thankless and impossible task. How is journalism trying to reinvent itself? Well, I don't know whether that's going on here, but now, one of the things that helps fake news is that one of the other facts that have come out is that we as individuals are much more likely to share a story based upon who shared it with us than we are where it came from originally. So if someone we like and know and trust shares a story about a two-headed monster that just happened to come down from another galaxy, we'll probably pass it on. But if someone we don't know or someone we don't like or someone we don't agree with posts a story that has a reputable source, an authoritative source, a believable source, many sources, direct evidence, we are tending not to pass it on. People share what have been shared with them. People don't share something that was originally credible necessarily. So journalism is trying to come up with some way to engage the audience. This whole notion that once upon a time journalists, professional journalists, were sort of the high priesthood of information. There were people who decided what was important, what was news. The most famous newspaper in the United States, New York Times, still has a little thing next to its title and it says, all the news that's fit to print. That's the slogan of the New York Times. And of course there's a pretty well-known joke that came from the American comedy Seinfeld. Anyone here know about Seinfeld? People do here. Jerry Seinfeld wondered, how come every day all the news that happens in the world always fits in that newspaper? It's amazing. Well, of course, it's not like that. People decide what is fit for you to read. Well, that is dead now. There is no arbiter of news. There is no high priesthood. There is no gatekeeper of news. News is what anybody says it is when they want to put it out there. So professional journalists are trying to come up with a way that the public will begin to trust them in a way that it used to trust them based upon the fact that they just worked for the New York Times or the Washington Post or CBS News. Those things don't count much anymore. So journalists need to develop a relationship with the reader, with the viewer, have a conversation with the reader and the viewer. And I even read, and I put bots down here, that the New York Times now has, and they don't even pretend they're not doing this. Because their reporters, as they are reporting stories, need to continue to tweet in real time with their audience, to engage their audience in the process of their reporting. It's something that's very, very popular now in American journalism. And of course, one person, one man, one woman cannot possibly keep up with all the tweets. So the New York Times now has engaged bots, has engaged algorithms to assume the guise of a reporter and have a communication with the readers in the guise of being that reporter, just to stimulate the reporter's engagement. So in other words, isn't that wonderful? Reporter, John Smith is live tweeting with 50,000 of his followers in real time, but in fact it isn't really John Smith, it's a bot. I want to mention, just to give you an idea of where things stand, there was a very recent influential study done by Stanford University, and the bottom line of the study was, and this was a study done with high school and college students across all socioeconomic areas, not rich, not poor, not private school, not public school, different ethnicities. High school and college students, the findings concluded were easily duped by misinformation, and the ability to reason about information on the internet, the assessment of their ability was bleak. So what did they do? Okay, they gave them exercises like this. This is the homepage of Slate.com. And they asked the high school and college students to look at 3 different sections of this homepage. The first one, this is or is not an advertisement because. This one, this is or is not an advertisement because. And the last one, this is or is not an advertisement because. And what did people respond to? Well, 40% of the college and high school respondents thought this was what? Anyone read that? What does sponsored content mean? Someone tell me.
Somebody pays for the content we put onto the website.
Someone pays for the content to be put up there. So is that journalism?
No.
No. Is that an advertisement?
Yes.
Yes. 40% of the respondents didn't know that. They found that people did not understand the difference between sponsored content and other things. Should California stop growing almonds? The nut has been vilified for drinking up the state's water supply. It doesn't deserve such a bad rap. Is that an advertisement, or is it a commercial, or is it a work of journalism? 25% of the people misidentify it as an advertisement. It's not an advertisement. It's a piece of journalism. This last one, Gotham Writers. It's an advertisement. This one was a little bit more sophisticated. You all remember the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant? This was posted on a photo sharing website, Fukushima Nuclear Flowers. Not much more to say. This is what happens when flowers get nuclear birth defects. Beautiful daisies. Does this post provide strong evidence about the conditions near the Fukushima Daiichi power plant? Explain your reasonings. Explain your reasoning. Radiation can do a lot of weird things. Well, The answer is this is not convincing at all. Maybe people say, this is really a no-brainer. Are you kidding me? People didn't get this? People didn't get it. For a variety of reasons. Last one. You get this tweet. Here's the status. Why might this tweet be a useful source? Why might it not be a useful source? And when they opened up the tweet, they saw that there was a poll conducted by MoveOn.org showing that the National Rifle Association is out of touch with gun owners and their own members. 2 out of 3 gun owners say they would be more likely to vote for a candidate who supported background checks. The gun lobby in the United States is an extremely powerful political entity. The United States Constitution has something called the Second Amendment, which gives the right to bear arms in a, quote, well-regulated militia. Of course, one could reload, it took a little bit longer to reload a weapon in 1787 than it does now. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people answered this incorrectly because MoveOn.org is a left-leaning political organization, which would mean that you would realize that the sponsor of this poll had a political agenda, yet the poll was conducted by a bona fide polling organization. So there was information on both sides that would help you identify the veracity of this kind of information. Nothing so far has seemed to work. This is my picture of a whack-a-mole. Anyone know what a whack-a-mole is? They happen here in carnivals? Okay. The internet and technology is staying ahead of us, as our depressing friend Brian Stelter said. As a matter of fact, if one follows what Facebook is doing, what Mark Zuckerberg is doing, his latest developers conference just a couple of days ago, he talked about the next big leap that Facebook is doing. Notice I call it fake book, that's a Freudian slip. Augmented reality, beginning to change the visuals of things. And in fact, if you think that fake news is powerful because it can manipulate the written word, what happens when video can be seamlessly manipulated? When you can have any politician or any head of state say anything on video, and for us not to know whether or not he or she really said it, because it's outrunning us. A lot of the critics have said that what we're hearing a lot of is what's called Band-Aid solutionism. How can we stop this runaway train of fake news? How can we stop it? There are news and media literacy programs, of which I'm a part of at Stony Brook University. But even within that world, there are debates. What is going to work? Do people need to be taught how to better understand and navigate the web and the internet? Or do people need to be taught about understanding journalism and media? Or they need to be taught about both? There, of course, are endless numbers of fact-checking sites. PolitiFact in the United States is one of them, and I'm sure there are some here. We have more fact-checking going on than we've ever had before. I was amused a couple of years ago. The CBS Evening News had a new feature. They assigned a reporter, and his little segment was called Reality Check. And they gave him about 45 seconds every night to do a reality check. 45 seconds out of a 22-minute newscast. And I thought, why isn't all 22 minutes a reality check? Why do they only get 45 seconds? Shouldn't any newscast be a reality check? We have a lot of fact-checking, but it does no good, evidently. Because again, the evidence suggests that if your mind is made up, and frequently your mind is made up because the information came to you through an emotional attachment, or the information came to you because it was shared with someone who you trust, or someone who you know. If your mind is made up, no amount of counter-argument, no amount of fact-checking is necessarily going to be convincing. And then lastly, we have what I think is, in a way, the most disturbing phenomenon, and that is the increasing reliance on algorithms to help us detect fake news. It's sort of like a GPS for critical thinking. Now we don't have to worry about memorizing how to get from point A to point B. We don't have to try to understand a map. We don't have to actually know where we are in order to get anywhere. What we're going to do is plug in the 2 points in the GPS and mindlessly follow it. And isn't life grand? Well, true. But now this notion that critical thinking, the ability to absorb and analyze and evaluate information, which is truly, I believe, the only antidote to fake news, that we're attempting now to outsource that. Again, because, as you said, because of the tsunami of fake news that comes along, we simply do not have the ability to cope with so much volume. So now there are more and more and more digital, high-tech, algorithmic solutions to root out fake news, to root out postings on Twitter or Facebook that are not accurate. I don't know, it's potentially a slippery slope. As I mentioned, we are not, sadly, rational human beings. We think we are, we're not. We don't even think individually, we think in groups. And more groupthink and thinking and information that's shared with us tends to dominate what our belief systems are. Ultimately, I really believe that in the digital age, we are responsible for deciding what's reliable and what's not reliable. Not an algorithm, not a professional fact checker. We have to do the work. We have to take the time to develop the critical thinking skills necessary to evaluate news. Not to share something unless we are convinced that we have done enough due diligence to convince ourselves in a rational way that this information is credible, that this information is actionable, this information is something that I can make a decision on, and I can make a choice on. Whether it's casting a vote, whether it's buying something or going somewhere, or giving money to an organization, I can take action on this information because I believe it. Unless we think, this is past the point where we're going to pass things on because it's interesting. We're going to pass things on because, well, let's see what people think about it. No, we only can pass things on now if we want to take it to the bank. And that's what this second half is going to be about. So, any questions about this so far? And we're going to go to second half. Yes, sir.
Do you think people just pass things on because they want the attention? Like, okay, what I'm trying to say is maybe when people are passing things on more and more because they feel like they have shared it. They've done something to produce that news in some way. Like,
I don't know what this is monkey clicking again, right? Monkey bait. I don't know what the psychological reasons are. Has anyone ever read a book called The Circle? It's about to come out as a movie with Tom Hanks and Emma Watson. It's written by a guy named Dave Eggers. And it's a fascinating book, and it's about this fictional organization which is sort of Facebook and Google gone crazy if they join together, And it's this world where you must share everything, because if you don't share it, it's somehow a fraudulent experience. I used to make fun of friends of mine who, every time they have an interesting meal, they take a picture of it and put it on Instagram. So they're always sort of, taking pictures of their food. And today at the hotel, I saw this fruit that I didn't recognize. It was dragon fruit. It was this unbelievably magnificent color, sort of almost like your blouse. It was like a great color, a little darker. And I thought, well, just for the joke, maybe I'm going to take a picture of it and put it on Instagram, but I didn't. I don't know why people want to do that. I don't know how that's infected the body politic, but people want to share. We all have the ability if we have a smartphone in our purse or in our pocket or our briefcase, we all have the ability to reach millions and millions and millions of people. I mean, we don't walk around feeling that way, because if we did, we'd all walk around feeling like really important. But just think about that for a second. We can reach millions of people, each and every one of us. We are each potentially more powerful than the most powerful publishers and writers cumulatively in the history of the world, just because you have that little device in your pocket. So it carries with it a really tremendous responsibility. Okay, I want to go to the next one real quick. Okay, so this is we have until 11:30, is that correct? So forgive me if I race through this a little bit. But obviously, the world of information, the world of journalism, it comes at us in lots of different ways. There are different languages. We could talk only about text, but we're going to talk about the old-fashioned newspaper, but I think we're going to talk a little bit about digital media. Mark Zuckerberg is a famous guy, and this looks pretty good. However, it's a fake Mark Zuckerberg post. Looks like a real one, but it's not. A lot of you would ask what we're doing about misinformation, so I asked 30 people to sit in a room and write an update. Bottom line is, we take our revenue seriously. What other bottom line is there? We have a goal to connect people with the marketing they find most meaningful, and somehow along the way we stumbled into being the savior of the media. Well, that's sort of faking a Mark Zuckerberg post and sort of trying to make a comment about what we think may be the dark rationale for Mark Zuckerberg doing what he's doing. Here's the real post. A lot of you have asked what we're doing about misinformation, so I wanted to give you an update. We take misinformation seriously. Our goal is to connect people with the stories they find most meaningful. Facebook is on the hot seat right now, as you know, in part because I don't know whether you've followed in the United States recently, now that there's Facebook Live, there have been several suicides that have gone live on Facebook. There was a murder that went live on Facebook. It took 2 hours for Facebook to take it down. So the power of Facebook now and the Facebook's responsibility is much more in the public eye. So here's a real post by Mark Zuckerberg, but there was a much bigger problem, which is some of the sponsored content. These are both phony posts. Tiger Woods, even though he's struggling, he hasn't died and he hasn't left the golfing tour forever. So BuzzFeed News has done a lot of reporting, and 3 big right-wing Facebook pages published false or misleading information 38% of the time during the period analyzed. Left-wing pages did so nearly 20%. So the fake information, hoax information happens on the left and the right. It happens more frequently on the right, at least in the United States of America. Things are true, things are false, they all look alike. How do we tell the difference?
Retired General Michael Flynn, who has the inside track to become President-elect Donald Trump's national security advisor, took to Twitter just days before the election and forwarded this false and rather unhinged story suggesting that the NYPD had found evidence of so many crimes on Anthony Weiner's laptop, including pedophilia, that Hillary Clinton and her crew would be put away for life. The story on something called TruePundit.com was a complete lie. Nonetheless, Flynn tweeted it to his tens of thousands of followers. "You decide," he wrote. It has since been retweeted nearly 7,000 times. After all, General Flynn, the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, wouldn't tweet it if it weren't true, right? False.
Okay, well, we all know that Michael Flynn is not employed anymore by the Trump administration, but this notion of passing on information and saying, you decide, I'm just passing on the information, is obviously disingenuous. As I said in the first presentation, fake news stories overtook real stories in terms of sharing on Facebook during the American election. And here it is again. Okay, top fake election stories by Facebook engagement. Top 5 mainstream election stories. Number 1, Pope Francis shocked the world and endorsed Donald Trump. Number 2, WikiLeaks confirmed that Hillary Clinton sold weapons to ISIS. Didn't know that Hillary Clinton had a stockpile, but she does. Her ISIS email is worse than anyone ever imagined. Hillary is disqualified from holding federal office, and FBI agents suspected in Hillary email leaks found dead in apparent murder-suicide. This kind of stuff I'll use a term, outperformed, outposted credible news. I mentioned this. Wired magazine, which is an interesting magazine which covers the digital world, just did a major story on this town in Macedonia where these characters make a lot of money. So here's an interesting case. This is like a deconstruction of how something goes phony. New York Times, an interesting story, how fake news goes viral, a case study. Donald Trump posted on November 10th, just had a very open and successful presidential election. Now professional protesters incited by the media are protesting, very unfair. So what happens here that some guy named Eric Tucker posted a thing on Twitter. Anti-Trump protesters in Austin today are not as organic as they seem. Here are the buses they came in. Okay? These are not protester buses. These are buses that were hired by a software company that was holding a conference. But he took pictures of these buses, put them on Twitter, and said that these buses hold the fake protesters, the paid protesters, to protest Donald Trump's election. Now, Reddit, very, very powerful site, has a community supporting Donald Trump, and they reposted this. Breaking, they found the buses, dozens lined up just blocks away from the Austin protests. Then, of course, the story hit Facebook. They found the buses, dozens lined up. So 307,616 people shared that. Remember, this was a bunch of buses brought for people who were attending a convention from a software company. Had nothing to do with protesting Donald Trump. Now it's hit Reddit, now it's hit Facebook. Now it's on something called Gateway Pundit. It continues building views, and now it is spreading through what's called the conservative blogosphere. A blogosphere made up of blogs and political commentary. Again, now it's got its own hashtag fake protests. And of course, circles right back around and circle back around, but we see it again. This got to the recently elected president of the United States, and he decided to tweet it. So it started out as sort of a completely ridiculous fabrication, winds up being a tweet from the president-elect after going through the social media universe. Snopes.com. Anybody familiar with Snopes.com? Snopes.com is probably the most credible, nonpartisan site to check any sort of questionable information. Snopes.com. It's kind of a goofy name, but it's excellent. Eric Tucker, who began it all, told the New York Times, I'm also a very busy businessman. I don't have time to fact check everything that I put out there, especially when I don't think it's going out there for wide consumption. So he thought it was kind of a harmless thing to do. What the hell? Just say these buses were, anti-Trump protesters. What the hell? It can't be that important. And look what happened. It wound up in a tweet from the president-elect. Snopes.com, very good site, very credible. As I said, the ecosystem of the internet, fake stories spread through hyperlinks, search results, and other web tools, it spreads like wildfire.
Facebook, Google, and Twitter have announced new efforts to stop the spread of fake news. Twitter has amped up its mute and report functions to slow dissemination of fake news. But you shouldn't leave it up to these big websites to perfectly curate all your news to you all the time. Here are a few easy ways to spot fake news. 1. Double check the URL. Some fake sites look like they have legit URLs, but take a closer look. This site tries to fool readers into thinking it's ABC News, but the web address is a few letters off. It was abcnews.com.co instead of abcnews.go.com, the real one. .co is the country code for Colombia. 2. Does the photo you're looking at seem photoshopped or unrealistic? It could be. Drag and drop the photo you're looking at into Google Images, and it can help you verify the original source of the image. 3. Can you identify the original source of the information in the story? Check that source against other sources. If other reputable news outlets haven't picked up the story, it's likely you're looking at fake news. Here are some sites we've seen deliver fake news. 4. Think about installing a Chrome extension to help you detect fake news. The plugin called Fib, Stop Living a Lie, was recently developed by 4 Princeton University students and can help you determine the validity of some news links. The plugin purports to verify pictures, text, tweets, and embedded links. It also checks the site for malware and dead links. Other Chrome extensions like BS Detector and Fake News Alert say they do similar things. Before you send an article to all your friends on social media, consider visiting ideas 1 through 4. You'll thank us later.
One of the things we did early on in the news literacy program at Stony Brook is we directed students to a website to do some research about Martin Luther King. This was several years ago. I don't know what's happened subsequently, but the number 2 site on Google several years ago, the number 2 hit on Google was a phony site sponsored by a white supremacist organization. Now, if you're smart enough and you check the URL and you do what is called going upstream, meaning check where this information you're now seeing links to. Where did it start? Don't just evaluate the site that you're looking at, but see where this information came from, because there's not that many places that are doing original reporting. Most of the information you will see on the web will have originated somewhere other than the website you're seeing it on. So the more that you can backtrack, the more you'll know whether or not you're getting valid information. Many people are coming up with some helpful tips. I just want to go through this rather quickly. Breaking News Consumer's Handbook. Big red flags for fake news, all caps. Pop-ups or banner ads. It's a good sign the story could be clickbait. Check the domain. Worry about fake sites. Check the About page. Always check the About page. Now, many of these things you probably already know, but you want to make sure that these sites are live, that they're not antiquated, they're not totally anachronistic. Follow the links. Not only go upstream, find out where the information came from, but where are these sites linking to? Because even something that looks very credible will send you to something that may be a tip-off that you're dealing with phony news. This means going upstream. Check the dates. Make sure the headline and the story matches. Use a reverse image search on Google. TinEye is a very good reverse image search. You can put images in and see where they come from. Gut check. If a story makes you angry, it's probably meant to make you angry. It's probably meant to make you angry. If it makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it makes you furious, it's primarily appealing to your emotions. Don't dismiss it out of hand, but look at it with a grain of salt. Finally, if you're not sure it's true, don't share it. Don't share it. Okay, I want to go through this very, very quickly now. In the news literacy course, we really begin with teaching people about how to read an article, how to read a simple article in a newspaper or a text piece on a newspaper's website. And it's really a process of what we call deconstruction. How do you deconstruct a news article? But the same thing can be done with any information you see online. One of the main points, now we understand, my God, this takes all the fun out of life. I mean, you're trying to read the newspaper. You can't turn everything into an intellectual exercise where, sorry, I'm still, writing down my checklist at the end of this article. Obviously, some of these things have to become second nature. You have to kind of think about this viscerally. One of the main points of the story, is the headline misleading, or is the headline, did the reporter open the freezer? Is the evidence direct or indirect? Let me explain that really quickly. Anybody here remember something called Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans many, many years ago? Well, there was an unbelievable story. It wasn't unbelievable, it was a gripping story. It was a terrible episode, and many, many people who were evacuated from their homes in New Orleans, who were rescued from the roofs of buildings, were herded into the Coliseum in New Orleans and housed there for days without air conditioning, without food, without sanitation. In fact, when the whole thing was over, they had to tear down the whole thing, or at least gut demolish the whole inside and rebuild it, because it was so spoiled and soiled by entrapping tens of thousands of people. And in the major New Orleans newspaper, the New Orleans Times-Picayune, was a story. There were backup generators, so there were some freezers working in the New Orleans Superdome. And in the New Orleans Times-Picayune was a story that a number of people had passed away, had died of heart failure, of complications from diabetes, of other issues in the Superdome, and their bodies were stored in this freezer until they could have been evacuated. It was a story that made its way around the world for no other reason than it was a heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching story. It was attributed to a National Guardsman who was guarding the freezer. The reporter talked to the National Guardsman, and the National Guardsman told the reporter there were bodies in that freezer. And the reporter reported it, and the story went all around the world. And the National Guardsman got the story from the National Guardsman who he replaced, who was there on the previous shift, who told it. Well, there were no bodies in the freezer, because the reporter didn't do one thing. The reporter didn't open the freezer and take a look for himself. In this case, it was Aikman. Didn't look for himself. So what any reporter has to do is the metaphorical equivalent of opening the freezer. Look for yourself. Question your sources. Find out why your source of information, how your source of information knows what he or she knows. Was the evidence direct? Did someone see it? Did someone witness it? Is there a document? Is there a recording? Is there a photograph? Or did someone tell someone tell someone? That's called indirect evidence. You want to look for stories that have direct evidence. Evaluate the sources using this, and I'll come back to this in a second. Is the reporter telling you everything you need to know about how and why the reporter got the information? Are things done in context? Are the key questions answered? This is all basic stuff that every journalist needs to do. In other words, what we're trying to say is you, A, have the responsibility, because you're all publishers, you are all the world's most influential journalists, not to pass on information you don't believe. Not to pass on information that you wouldn't bet a decent amount of money on. On the other hand, conversely, you have to demand of the professional journalists that they do the same thing. We're not going to talk about fairness and balance just yet. Digital age headlines, you have to understand that people write headlines for websites. Their number one concern is something called SEO. Anyone know what SEO means? Everyone knows this. Search engine optimization. You're writing a headline so you'll be clicked. And they're good enough so you don't even have to be a monkey to click it, right? Headlines are written to sell. The most famous headline in the history of New York City tabloids, matter of fact, the man who wrote this headline recently died, and they did an obit about him because it was so famous. Headless body and topless bar. And it's true. I mean, it was a topless bar and they found a headless body, and it's a great headline. But the web might write the headline this way, and mobile might, you won't believe what cops found in a Queens bar, okay? These are kind of clickbait headlines. We all know now about listicles. So many websites which are monetized just give you lists of factoids. You always need to ask a two-word question. If you're a producer of news and a consumer of news, and in many cases you are both producers and consumers of news, says who? You know, the phrase that I find myself latching onto with many of my journalism students when they say, people say, or they say. And I say, well, who's they? Tell me who they is. And you've got to make sure, it's easy to get away with that in conversation. But my 18-year-old son, boy, he spends a lot of time looking at YouTube, and he reports back all sorts of phantasmagorical facts to me. And I try to tell him, nope, you know what, what's the source? Well, it was on, what's the source? Says who? So I'm going to end with this, because this is a system that can help you evaluate any kind of content. And the little mnemonic device is I'm vain, like the famous Carly Simon song, He's So Vain. And that is that independent sources are better than self-interested sources. I'm giving you information. I'm a source. If I have a stake in the story, if I have the stake in the game, if I have some interest in it, my credibility is a little bit muddied up a little bit. Not that the information you're getting from me is necessarily wrong, but even if I'm the aggrieved mother of someone who was recently murdered in a gangland shooting, and I'm a reporter, I'm getting information from this woman. Well, she may indeed be telling me the truth, but I also have to understand that she is emotionally invested in this. There's a famous journalist in the United States called Dan Rather. He always used to use the phrase, I don't have a dog in that fight. That's why you don't necessarily believe sponsored content all the time, because the source is not independent. Independent sources are better than self-interested sources. Multiple sources are better than single sources. That, by the way, if you read any of these, I won't categorize them as trashy, any of these Hollywood gossip publications like Us Magazine or OK or People Magazine, There's always a good friend of Jennifer Aniston tells you something, right? I don't know who this good friend of Jennifer Aniston is. The good friend is never named, right? But boy, he or she knows stuff about Jennifer Aniston that no one else knows. Well, that's because this person doesn't exist. We'll get to that in a second. Multiple sources are better than single sources. Just think about everyday life. Someone you know tells you something out, just hard to believe. Well, if 3 people tell you, if 5 people tell you the same thing, and they haven't all passed the information on to one another, you're going to be more likely to believe it. The same thing with news reports. A single source for a story, this is all weighing evidence. Nothing is clear cut. I will believe it, I won't believe it. It's how much weight you give the information. Sources who verify with evidence are better than sources who just assert. I think, I feel, I know, I saw, I interviewed, I was there, it happened to me. I can verify information. It's verifiable. Authoritative and informed sources are better than uninformed sources. That's an obvious one. But sometimes it can be a little tricky. You're reading a story, a medical story, and it's about some outbreak of a skin condition, and the person quoted is a dentist. Well, maybe a good dentist, but unless you're, getting information about wisdom teeth being extracted, maybe you want to get information from a dermatologist if you're talking about a skin condition. And lastly, named sources are better than unnamed sources. And this is something that the world of journalism deals with all the time. Anonymous sources. The New York Times is frequently criticized for using unnamed anonymous sources. It's tough because sometimes the best sources with the best information are anonymous. But if you're a reporter and you use an anonymous source, or you're a news consumer and you're reading a report, and you're reading information, but you don't know who it's from, it's just from an anonymous source, you've got to ask yourself, well, why is this source anonymous? Did the reporter tell me why the source is anonymous? The source is anonymous because he or she is afraid of professional repercussions. Or did the reporter do something to kind of identify the source? It's a highly placed staff member in the president's cabinet, as opposed to somebody who works at the food truck down the street. In other words, anonymous sources need to be credentialed if they're to be believed. But when you get any information, you've got to take this kind of rubric. Look for independence, look for evidence, look for a number of sources, look for provable information as opposed to assertive information, look for informed sources, look for named sources, and lay that over all these things about the web, right? Is the URL real? Does it link to, or has it been linked from a reliable source? Is it up to date, et cetera, et cetera? All this sounds exhausting. You may say, you know what, the hell with it. It's too much work to know what to believe. So I'm just going to be ignorant. Or I'm just going to believe anything that comes my way because I got to trust my people. And if my people are going to share these things with me, I'm going to believe them and I'm going to pass them on. Well, there's a danger in that. Not that I think anyone in this room is going to pass anything on that could be damaging or deleterious, but you know the point I'm trying to make. This notion that we have a responsibility, that we all are, in our own individual ways, potentially more powerful than any publisher or writer or reporter who ever walked on the planet Earth, is kind of sobering. And I think all of us now, whether we're citizens of the United States or citizens of Indonesia, are beginning to see how this phenomenon of fake news can become dangerous and disempowering. Because it's not so much, go back to what Brian Stelter said, we don't want to become confused, we don't want to become exhausted. We want to be autonomous, and we want to base our decisions on information that we can believe in. So with that, I think I'm going to end it. And any questions or comments? Yes.
So
Can you speak up a little bit, or aren't you?
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Lavina. I'm a communication student. So I want to ask, if the media are no longer trusted for credible sources and facts, how can we actually educate the majority of people that have low media literacy? Because in that context, the media, the mainstream media, now can no longer serve the purpose as education tool for these people. And your solution by like giving more like education on literacy, I don't think that it can actually reach people on rural areas and have like low economic status. Like, and those people are actually the problem. Like in the United States, they and moreover, their beliefs are being verified by the president itself. So, how do you respond on that?
I mean, I don't think anybody has a solution. I mean, I do think the solution is, it sounds like a cliche, education. It's getting individuals at a pretty early age. I think because even in rural areas, even in areas that don't even have necessarily good connectivity, that don't even have good wireless, more and more people have mobile devices, more and more people have smartphones, and there are ways to get digital educational information to people. I think it has to start in the schools. I really do. I think it has to start in the schools. I think it's almost too late by the time someone's in college. I really do. I think it has to start in elementary school, in middle school, in grammar school. I think that's really the only, I mean, I think there will be technological solutionism. I think there will be, you know, as I said, the equivalent of GPS for thinking, you know, but that worries me a little bit. Something is going to tell me it's okay to believe this information based upon its own algorithmic analysis. I don't know, makes me a little nervous. Yes?
One of the most biggest animal and fake news. One of the biggest part of fake news is certain news that is delivered through a certain political agenda. And in the United States, it's a little bit easier to see through, like you said, there are web news and good news. There are certain media from the liberal or conservative, but here in Indonesia is kind of harder to see because we operate on a multiple political party system. So it's kind of hard to guess which news is coming from which side or which part. And for a country with such many political parties, we have very small credible sources to processing. So, what is your advice for something like us to how to trust the sources? And also, one of the things that worries me about here in Indonesia is that the government is shutting a lot of important websites like Reddit and Vimeo. You cannot access those websites in Indonesia. And
Just read Turkey has shut down Wikipedia. Just read that.
yeah, and it worries me because I don't know if in the future the government is gonna shut down more websites, and I just want to know if there's something we can do as a civilian to protest like that to the government, or to get around that block.
I don't want this to be a cop-out, but if I had really good answers to those questions, I would be much wiser than I am, and maybe the wisest person on earth. Obviously, you have so many more viable, active, robust political parties, so many more balls in the air. It's sort of exponentially more difficult here. You have to apply the same criteria, but just do it more so. That's really all I can say. You have to make sure that you work with and respond to and support the best journalism, the most reputable journalism, because some of this is going to be dictated by the demand side. In other words, if you don't buy the material, if you don't click on the material, it's going to go away. We're the ones who provide the fuel to this fire. It's not much of a help, I understand it. Wish I knew.
We've been living, my name is Arun Ramanam, I'm a lecturer here. We've been living a long time on fake news, you know. Weapons of mass destruction, isn't that fake news that we've been living on? For how many decades now?
Well, you know, I wouldn't call it fake news. I think that trivializes it too much. You know, I would call it misinformation. But yes, it's a form of fake news.
Well, I think misinformation and disinformation.
Disinformation, misinformation.
Has been a practice of the CIA for a long time. No?
Well, listen, you can go back to you know, the original rationale for the United States engagement in the Vietnam War.
Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin.
And the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So, and I think you can go back farther than that. I think to some extent, you know, fake. I think the important point you raise is that we shouldn't allow this fake news moniker to trivialize what sometimes can be pure propaganda, sometimes can be clearly politically motivated information that can be, you know, media can be misdirected. But yes, the answer is yes. This is nothing new. I just think that the proliferation of it and the overt nature of it right now is what's new.
Okay, let me take up on another point. Recently, a few days ago, now I'd like to talk about journalistic mindset. A few days ago, the British Defence Minister made a statement that should have provoked journalistic reactions everywhere. He said that Britain was ready to make a first strike in case it was necessary. The target, of course, is Russia. No comment. It was just reported in the newspaper, as is. All right? But then came the Russian response. If Britain thinks of doing a first strike, Britain will be erased from this planet, will not exist anymore. Now I'm talking about the journalistic mindset. Why doesn't a journalist comment the British Defence Minister? I mean, it's a ludicrous statement
Did
to
that
say...
not get any comment in the British press? I can't imagine that.
Not much. Well, just a little bit, saying, well, whatever comment they can make. But do they make the comment that a Russian nuclear strike on Britain, you know, Britain will not exist anymore? So I'm talking about journalistic blackout. That's what the Western mainstream media is doing now. Do you know what the other press is thinking in the other parts of the world? No, you don't know in the US.
You're absolutely right about that.
You don't
You're
know.
absolutely right.
You don't know what Russians are thinking. You don't know what Chinese are thinking. You only know what your mainstream media is thinking. So you form a judgment, and I think it's very serious for Indonesia because we take the mainstream media, especially the U.S. media, for granted. We trust it, and then we have our own, you know, fake news. So we got a double dose of fake news in Indonesia. Thank you.
You got more applause than I did.
For you too.
All right. No, I mean, you make a very good point. Any other questions? I think we're out of time. Huh? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope that was somewhat edifying. It's an applause meter. I want more applause than you got. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Rainer. So I will not conclude or summarize the speech because it's already clear and informative enough. I just want to highlight one thing about refuse to confuse, which means that the power is actually in your hand and we are able to select, to share, and because most of us are in information and communication field, we can do a lot to combat, because as you said earlier, our roles in here also to how to combat the fake news based on the title of today's discussion. And also one thing that I also remember, that it is true that, as Professor Rainer said, that we or the audience usually feel first before think, right? So the first one in the chart, it's usually people share things because they feel that it's right, or from the they engage, emotionally engage to the source before they rationally think about the credibility of the source. So I think we can do a lot to combat. Yes, think once before you act, twice before you speak, 3 times before you post on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and Snapchat, I think. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Rainer, everybody. So this is the end of our discussion. Good morning, everyone.
Terima kasih atas partisipasinya peserta sekalian untuk diskusi yang sangat menarik hari ini dari BINUS International University, dan ICP akan memberikan souvenir kenang-kenangan kepada Profesor Stephen Rainer. Mempersilahkan Ibu Deni.